Welcome back to Ribbon Candy Hooking. Good morning. Can you believe that it's this time of year already? Well, because it's this time of year, I am looking forward to some holiday patterns and even Thanksgiving patterns, right? So during this time, I think about colors and prints that I like to go to in some of my novelty materials. And one of my favorite novelty materials that seems to fit best in the winter months is paisley. So I'm always getting questions about paisley, and I thought I have done videos before on it, but let's do something with a little bit of a different twist. The question that always comes up with paisley is how do I cut it into strips? So that's what we're going to be talking about in this video. But beyond that, paisley is expensive, right? So you're finding this is antique paisley. You're finding it in antique stores and yard sales, and if you're lucky, vintage stores. And honestly, a full-size scarf, like a big scarf, even riddled with huge holes, right? Like cannonball fire holes, is still going to cost you between $300 and $500 because of the scarcity. Many of these scarves are like 1820s, 1840s, early Victorian period. They were great luxury items at the time. They were important fashion icons of that time. They were loomed abroad and brought to New England ports, right, on old ships, and that they were part of the whole trading era, right? And they were a big part of the fashion era too, right? They spanned a couple of generations in terms of ladies having to have paisley shawls, also paisley kinds of coverings for your piano, your table, maybe your mantle. It was a big deal. It was a big deal. And it's a fragile fiber. So some paisleys are, well, older paisleys are going to be 100% wool, but it's a super fragile fiber and it's loomed. And when we look at the back of a paisley, see, this one has got holes and it's a small patch, but I still wanted it because it's green, right? That's really different. This doesn't look like a particularly old paisley to me. This looks like a late Victorian paisley, not an early Victorian paisley, but it's got riddled with holes, but it's still very interesting because of the color scheme. And when you look at the back, you can see how it's made up, right? The paisley part is added to sort of a backing fabric with a ton of fine stitches, right? A bunch of small threads are putting the pattern together. Now, wouldn't you think that when you cut the threads this way across, or even this way, that there would be a lot of loss, that the threads would just atomize in your fingers? You would think so, but it doesn't happen. Let me show you. I'll just cut a little bit here with my scissors. When I'm cutting paisley, I'm never going to cut it too skinny because it will atomize in my hands. And this is too expensive of a material to be playing with in such a cavalier way. It will fall apart in my hands. So I'm always going to want to cut something like this, at least a half an inch, right? At least a half an inch. And when I'm working in a latch hook backing, which I sometimes do, as opposed to, for example, a traditional rug hooking backing, like a cloth woven backing, then I cut them even wider. So when I cut it like this is my average. Sometimes I do a little bit skinnier. This is about the skinniest that I would want to go. I wouldn't want to go under like what would be like a 9 rug hooking because I'd be too scared. Now here's the threads. If I pull at them, are they going to come apart? Well, probably if I try hard enough, right? You can make anything happen. But they're gonna hook, right? You can't, this is not a fiber, it's very fine. It's not a fiber that you can play with over and over and over and over, right? You cut your strips, you hook them. You're not going to take them out too many times without there being loss and damage to the fiber. This is an antique. But I can cut them as small as I would say maybe, well, it's got to be close to a half inch. It's got to be. Otherwise, I think you're taking a big chance. Also depends on the paisley. Because as you can see, there are different parts to the paisley too. There's parts that have like less thread and more backing. And this is a dark green backing, which I think began life is a black backing. It's hard to tell. So that's just an example of one. We've got others like this that are even thinner, right? This is just a fragment that I have left. Nice apricots and lemons, and the background, which was probably more of an ivy, has mellowed into kind of a celery color. Real pretty. This one also has a lot of movement. Now, sometimes and this was hemmed and used for something, right? The very amateur hem job, what looks like an old hem job. So maybe this was hanging over a mantle or something, and I have clipped it since because I've used bits of it. Just really nice color palette. And again, same thing. Do I want to cut this way or this way? It honestly doesn't matter. You just can't cut it into like a 3, 4, 5, one of your fine cuts for rug hooking, because it's just going to fall apart. So I would do it as an experiment. I keep almost doing it as an experiment, but my heart won't let me because it's too nice of a material. So even with this one, I would be looking at, I'm not worried about necessarily cutting it straight. I try to cut it straight when I can, but I'm probably going to do something like this. And you kind of play it by ear, right? And you can see, let me get my ruler out. We can see, I do a lot of stuff by eye. And for those of you who are technical, you probably want something more technical. So that's just over a 1/2 inch. That's about the most narrow I would want to do. So for myself, you can experiment with your paisleys, because it might be that you're finding paisleys that are not as old as one might think. So I'm going to play with all these soon because I have a great project in mind. This is a very common color for paisley. You see a lot of these tomato colors, like tomato soup backgrounds. This was a very popular color because for people in the U.S., it really resonated. This color seemed very exotic and very Eastern. So many things were had that were done in this kind of color palette. It's a very common one. These are all old pieces. And this one already has a bit of a cut in it. I didn't do that. You can see that's old because it has been fraying. So you see it does have potential to fray. Worst case scenario, and this one is quite a different story. If we look at it, this one does have some integrity issues. I don't know if you can see, but I can almost see right through it. It's almost transparent. I think what happened in this case is that the background, which is the tomato red, oh yeah, look at this. Sometimes red is a really sort of acidic dye, and red is one of the first colors that can disappear in crazy quilts or in any textile because it disintegrates over time, and I think that's what's happening here. I think the background is slowly disintegrating, and the other fibers that are other colors are holding on, because if you can see it, you can't really see it, can you? Here, put it on pause for a second. Yeah. See what I mean? When I hold it up to the window, you can see that there is a lot of weakness in the background. And does that mean that I'm not going to use it? Oh, I'm definitely going to use it.
Good.
Oh, I'm definitely going to use it because it's a beautiful old paisley. I'm going to be aware of that, right? And I'm going to be aware when I'm cutting it that this is one especially that I'm not going to cut extra fine, extra thin, because this one is already kind of hanging on, no pun intended, by a thread. So, and let's see what else we've got here. There's some other, I always pick it up when I find it places, even if it's bits and pieces. Sometimes I see people selling it online on Facebook or whatever, and it's bits and pieces and it has holes, and it's like, you know what? I still want it, because weirdly enough, even within the same color family, all of these different paisleys are going to hook up differently. They're all going to look different and unique. And even if I say to you, oh, I'm using this one, what are the chances of you finding this one? It's basically 0, isn't it? So you find paisleys and color schemes that you like and work them into your patterns. We'll talk more about that as well. This is a huge old paisley. And this is one, I don't know where I got this. I got it this summer. I'm going to hold this for a second because I want to surprise you with this in a minute. But I got this at an antique store, and it wouldn't have been hundreds and hundreds of dollars, or I wouldn't have been able to justify it in my head. A lot of the paisleys that you see that are for tablecloths, right? This is a wool one, and it's gotten a little bit felty in the back, right? Which can happen, which is not a bad thing because it means that the only place on this paisley where there is paisley is the border. And this is something to consider when you encounter these in stores because, for example, this whole, like this is a fraction, this is a quarter of it. Like this piece here is a quarter of it. This is enormous, but the whole center is black. And yeah, it's got some holes, but I don't mind about that. I'm going to use, this is wool. I'm going to use the black for another project, another time, and I'm going to cut it into strips. But what I want is the meat, right? The meat on the bone is the paisley here. So with a piece this size, I get this pattern 4 times because you're seeing a fourth of it. It's folded into quarters. And it's this beautiful heavyweight wool. And it's a very unusual color palette with lots of golds and different shades of green, right? It's very, very different. The way the colors go together, it almost looks like there's purple, optical illusion colors next to each other, and pinks, and there's really not. These are the colors that are present. But I can tell by looking at it that it has felted a little bit, and it is nice and thick, and it's going to be easy to work with. This is going to be a very easy one to cut. Again, I'm always going to have my option. Do I want, with this one, I have more than one option. Do I want to cut it this way or this way? That's totally up to me, and it really depends. For example, if I wanted this to do something color changing, I would cut it right across here. It really doesn't matter, and it depends on what you want. You're going to get something that looks really similar regardless. But with a piece like this, where the background, the back side of it is so interesting, it might also be like a further question, do I want to use the front or the back? Right? That could be. I wouldn't use the back personally because I think it won't read as well as a traditional paisley, and being, such expensive textiles, I'm probably going to want to go with this. But it would be an option with a beautiful piece like this. Now, paisleys are super expensive. And this is what I wanted to show you. I've mentioned this before, but maybe you missed it. Besides picking up paisleys when I can for a song, right? Flea markets is like probably my number one, because I probably have about 30 paisleys in the other room. Different cuts, different sizes, but in terms of patterns. And I guess in my head, I'm waiting for that one great Thanksgiving pattern that I can put all of them together as a sampler and not waste them, right? Something really astonishing and forever beloved in my mind, right? So that's a tough one. But while I'm acquiring paisleys according to my wallet, I do still want to hook with things that feel like hooking with paisleys, because the quality of a paisley is that it's very, very sheer. And as you hook it, the pattern that the loops make is completely unique, unexpected. It's great for primitive rug hooking because it's great for backgrounds. It's great for fills and borders because it always makes a distinct pattern. But I found something else that makes a distinct pattern that also comes in paisley a lot, and it is the Challis shawl. Do you remember these shawls? We see them less and less as time goes by. Berkshire was the main company that made the Challis shawl, and that's how you spell Challis. You can find these on eBay. You can find them in thrift stores. Mostly they are 100% acrylic. Once in a while you find one that is a different brand, like a little bit of a higher end brand that is 100% wool, still Challis. But the thing about these is they are very cheap when you find them, right? They can be like $1, $2, maybe $10. They look like a paisley shawl. They have that kind of transparent feel to them. They're typically the same weight as a traditional paisley shawl, very, very thin. They hook in a very similar way, feel similar to hook with Challis, and they make a similar pattern, and they often come in paisleys. Beyond often coming in paisleys, this is a nice navy one with that tomato color. And this is a really, I think these are both Berkshire, because Berkshire made most. Sometimes they did a handkerchief sewing on the edge, and sometimes they left the fringe like this. You probably won't end up using that part anyway, so it doesn't matter. But this is a nice colorful paisley. It's infinite. The amount of patterns that you can get with Challis shawls are infinite. And you can cut different parts out of it. For example, I would use the purple part maybe in a different place than I would use the paisley part. But for what these cost, I have to say it's a very similar look that these will give, and particularly in the same pattern. But when you're looking at Challis shawls that were fashion shawls, popular in like the 1980s, 1990s, you're looking at a much lower price tag, and you're looking at more color options. Whereas these old antique paisleys are beautiful, and maybe what you like about them are the mellow colors. And if that's the case, then you have to keep seeking out the paisley shawls. But what if you just like the way that they feel very light, almost gossamer to hook with? Then maybe you could go to a less expensive product that hooks in a very similar way, and then you can have this extended color palette, because the shawls of the 1980s and 90s give you a huge color range from crazy swatch watch Benetton pop colors to really mellow sort of tomato and brown earthy colors like traditional shawls. It's just an option, different options, whether that it depends on your pocketbook or not, separate from whether you think, oh, I would just like to collect some shawls because they're great for hooking too. The Challis shawls I would cut in the same way. Even though they aren't as fragile, I still only cut with my scissors. And because they're so thin, like old paisleys. These are even thinner, actually. I cut them a little bit wider. I'm just doing it by sight, what I would do. And then I would cut off for myself, and it's up to you. I would cut off the stitching on them, or I would cut off the fringe on them really carefully, you know. And let's get that ruler again. Where'd the ruler go? Let's see what I did here. It's probably quite similar. Yeah, it's pretty much the same. So I did like almost 3/4 of an inch on that. Maybe a hair, like 1/8 of an inch bigger. A hair, because they're so thin. And you can do them thicker and then they'll just hook more sort of lofty and full. Also a possibility. But in short, to make a long story short, too late. How do I cut paisley shawls? How do I cut any thin material? Always with scissors. Always with scissors. I feel I can control it best that way. And when I get in there with scissors, I can really choose if I wanted a specific part. I can really get in there very carefully and say, what I need in this area against, you know, the light blue is really some gold, and just go right to the heart of the color that I want with my scissors. So a lot of fun. I don't know if I'm going to be able to stop cutting though. It is really fun to start cutting up shawls. So hopefully that's helpful. Answer: the scissors. Isn't it nice when the answer to a rug hooking problem is something as inexpensive as old scissors? These are some Fiskars, but right. Use your clothing scissors though when you cut, if you can, if you have separate scissors, because you don't want to stress out the threads with like the kitchen scissors. I've been known to do that too, but use your best scissors if you can. And I will see you next time at Ribbon Candy Hooking.